Thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Kirsten, and together with my sister Lynn, we created the Anti-Racist Table, which is a multidimensional platform aimed at helping people bring anti-racism into life as a daily practice. We do that primarily with our free 30-day challenge, and we have just upgraded our platform, making it easier for people to self-pace. We have organizations, communities, groups of people doing the challenge together. If you haven't checked out our website or the challenge, we invite you to do that now. Right now, we're really excited to have Charles and Shamm from Lion Story. Right now, the work that they're doing couldn't be more relevant as we see the events unfolding across the nation, and just the importance of the narrative that's told. And as recently as yesterday, the 1776 Commission report that was published that really attempts to tell one story, and we're really focused on telling the true story of America and figuring out how we can heal together as a nation and focusing on racial healing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lynn, who's going to do our land acknowledgement.
Yes. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Like Kirsten said, as we work to repair our relationships with ourselves, with our communities, with Indigenous communities, and the land that we occupy, we find that bringing awareness and offering a land acknowledgement helps to reestablish the connection that we have with the land. So we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement that is inspired by Ruth King. She's an African-American mindfulness practitioner who inspires us every day. If you don't know about her, definitely look her up. She's someone to be connected with. So I would like to call on my ancestors to stand with me as I acknowledge the Native custodians of this land. It's colonized and named Washington, D.C. by the colonizers. The Native land is the Piscataway land and the Anacostan people. Those people that are named, unnamed, known, unknown, past and present. We honor all traditions and traditional custodians of this region. And we recognize their continued connection to this land, to this water, and to this community. We pay respect to the earth, whose generous resources sustain us on a daily basis. And we pay respect to the African enslaved people who were bought, held, sold here and held here, and all of their descendants. And we also pay respect to the people throughout the world who are living in captivity. We pay respect to their spiritual labor, and we pay respect to our ancestors whose unwise relationship to race and racism we have inherited. We pay respect to our teachers and our elders, past, present, and emerging, and all of the young people today who are teaching us. We pay respect to this gathering, everyone here, and our special guests for taking the time and energy to be with us today. May we recognize that we all share an aspiration for liberation, to be free in heart, mind, and body. Ashe, here ends our land acknowledgement.
Thank you. And I did put in the chat the website that we use if you're interested in looking up the land where you live or where you grew up or where you went to school. So you have that. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished guest from Lion Story. We have Charles Adams. He is the founder and managing partner. For over 20 years, Charles worked on behalf of children in schools and not-for-profit settings. As a former district school leader, Charles worked in New York and Washington, D.C., leading innovative school environments that upgraded the expectations for both schools and students alike. Most recently, he served as the executive director for the Greater Philadelphia region of Teach for America. As a founder and managing partner of Lion Story, Charles continues to leverage the power of education and seeks to elevate racial literacy as an effective tool to fuel empowerment and fight injustice. Charles holds a Bachelor's of Science from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, a Juris Doctorate from the Howard University School of Law, and a Master's of Education from Baruch College, the City University of New York. He is licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania and to serve as a school administrator. We're also honored to have Shamm Petros, partner and director of learning and evaluation at the Lion Story. She is a refugee from Eritrea. Shamm is committed to supporting the psychological well-being and development of migrant children across the world. Shamm has several years of experience conducting extensive research for program development, leading project design, securing funding, and engineering tools for various refugee protection and education programs across the United States, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and Iraq. Additionally, she provided direct clinical services to African Americans and forced migrants affected by complex and sexual trauma. Her unique experience in international refugee relief services prepared her to provide direct clinical services as well as lead the design of trauma-informed, culturally relevant psychosocial interventions for various populations. Shamm has also served as clinical research coordinator of the Research Empowerment Collaborative, REC, at the University of Pennsylvania, leading the delivery, monitoring, and evaluation of a school-based cognitive behavioral trauma intervention. Ms. Petros holds an MS Ed in counseling and mental health services, a master's in philosophy in professional counseling from the University of Pennsylvania's Graduate School of Education. And with that, welcome both of you. We're honored to have you and very excited for this very timely conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And at this time, if you are interested in a land acknowledgement, you can do one. If not, we can dive right in.
I would quickly name that we're on Lenape land in southeastern Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charles.
So we thought that we could start this conversation, the proverb that we guess is behind the name of your organization. The lion story will never be known as long as the hunter is the one to tell it. If you could just tell us about that and the work that Lion Story is doing.
There's so many angles, right, Charles?
Agreed. Yeah, so this is the proverb that roots our work. It's a proverb that Dr. Stevenson, whose research, 3 decades of research out of the University of Pennsylvania, has used for a number of years. And one of our values as an organization is that authorship is freedom. And we fundamentally believe that people should have the opportunity, the space, the willingness and the skill to tell their own story. And we believe that everyone has a racial story. I would say, in this country, but I really in the world, right? And without creating spaces for folks to tell those stories, then you really only hear one narrative, And I appreciate Kirsten and Lynn mentioning last week and what, tomorrow may bring, so to speak, in terms of the inauguration, right? That last week was a result of certain stories not being told or not being cared for. So this is a proverb that we use all the time. And one thing that we often say also is we don't necessarily want to become the hunter, right? We just want to make sure that everyone's story is told.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's very telling of how we do our work, equally as to why we do the work. We're very much driven by storytelling. So everything that we do engages folks to deep dive into their own stories and alter their own racial stories. And we think that's a fundamental skill to really combat racism.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a vehicle for liberation, certainly. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing I'd quickly add is that I mean, this quote, I was going to say it before it came up, but the storytelling aspect is really powerful. I think it's liberating, it's freeing, but we're raised and we live in a society where people are taught to sidestep conversations around race. And it's a weird, twisted moment where if you bring up something around race, like you could be, labeled a racist or calling someone a racist, when in reality, you might just be talking about your first memory or your first messaging, or lived experience around race, depending on your own identity. So yeah, Dr. Stevenson, this is the first step to healing racial fear. And everyone has a story. And we often say, folks are like, well, I don't really have a racial memory. Well, in a country that's founded on and are built upon slavery and the labor of others, if no one ever talked to you about race, from a social studies teacher to a parent or a grandparent, there's an issue there, right? And so to Shamm's point, we look to have folks who participate in our work and our trainings and our institutes to take that step.
Yeah, and it's almost like we have to do that deep dive and excavation, of just finding, the source of our narrative, because it really, it just leaves that distorted image. I mean, if you think about the story and the narrative of African American people, I mean, we were people with a culture, with, excellence, with, with the language, with, community, all very much established, and got completely ripped out of that. And then, given this distorted half-truth narrative where we couldn't even keep our own names, so that they intentionally ripped out, the essence of the human being, when the institution of slavery became kind of the engine that created, the money and all of the power of this country. They just, pulled everything out of the African Americans' connection to themselves, the land, and all of that. So reclaiming that is really powerful. And also for the white people too, they need to understand, their connection to that whole story. I feel like a lot of them feel like they don't really have any part in this, and that they can just kind of, pick and choose what they want to be part of. But I feel like they really need to be 100% in the game, because they really do. They are big players in this.
Can you talk a little bit about, what is racial literacy? So people who are unfamiliar with that term, in the context of the work that you do, what can you describe that?
Racial literacy. I mean, sometimes I like to approach it as just gaining a fluency in any other language that you might know or speak. And when we look at it in the larger context, Charles mentioned to us that people sidestep conversations around race. But a lot of people are taught how not to talk about race rather than how to talk about race. So they really do not have, let alone the linguistical or the behavioral skills to engage in a conversation. A racial conversation that could be stressful, or a racial conversation that even could be casual. And this really relates to, it's like the collective psyche of America. People avoid talking about race. And as they avoid engaging racial incidents. So for us to gain literacy is really to be able to engage racial stress and incidents with some level of mastery. And some level of confidence and some level of competency, because we believe it's a skill. We believe there are several skills involved in becoming racially literate. When we break it down, when Dr. Stevenson dissects it, he believes it's the ability to read, recast, and resolve racial stress. And
does this look different for teens versus adults?
No. Actually, the work comes from his care of youth and his work with families. So really, the first research question I think Dr. Stevenson ever tried to answer was, how do you talk to your children about race? And And that work, and the work itself is a dichotomous nature, because in engaging children, you have to also consider the adult. So how is the adult then prepared to give lessons about race, be social and socialize the youth? And how is the youth able to be socialized by this other dyad?
Right.
So when we look at read, recast, and resolve, it holds true development across developmental. And you have to understand too, or the way we see it and I see in our work, there's not a huge correlation between developmental age and racial literacy development.
Hmm.
Like there are 7-year-olds that can talk about race better than adults.
Right. So now is the time to start having those conversations.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'd love to hear more about read, recast, and resolve.
Yeah. So we can share easily. Read, recast, and resolve is the ability to inherit racial literacy skills and racial fluency. So with the reading is, and I like to joke and say this all the time, Charles is going to be so annoyed. But
I'm good.
reading, we teach people how to read themselves and their environment and the context during a racial exchange. And to read yourself, we believe, is to be able to assess what's going on before, during, and after this moment, cognitively, physically, and emotionally. And Dr. Stevenson has created a strategy to help us read ourselves and others during these moments. It's called CLCBE. It's a mindfulness-based strategy. And we'll probably have time to maybe even do a little exercise later on.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, that would be
But-
great. I definitely feel like that's the one thing that as soon as someone feels triggered, and I feel like race conversations always like set off a trigger, they just literally go out of the body. It's like you got to pull yourself back in to stay in the conversation.
Yes.
You know, so like you're saying, like you have to be able to read yourself. You know, where are you, in your brain, in your body, in your heart realm, all of that. So that's wonderful. You could share those strategies.
Yeah.
With that.
And that's where our work is really at that nexus of like stress, of freezing or fleeing or flying or fighting. That's really where our work lies. Is in that moment, what's your decision? Are you going to engage? Or are you going to avoid? But in order to do that, you really have to be able to excavate everything that you're going through.
And
So-
do you have a program that you're teaching, youth how to
Lynn,
do
maybe
this?
we could get through the rest of the steps.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is so interesting. I could ask you
That's good. That's good.
Yeah,
about this.
That question.
And racial stress. Yeah, this is a wonderful quote that Dr. Stevenson has about this monster of racial stress. Yeah, Kirsten, do you want to read it, and maybe we can talk about
So,
it?
well, I think Shamm was going to tell us about recast and resolve also.
Yeah, no problem. We're here. I'll remember that question, Lynn.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I got it too.
So if reading gets you to a point where you can name and validate your experience, likely stressful experience, reading gets you to a point where maybe you can articulate part of your exchange or story, and it might sound like, I was stressed at a 10 and I felt it in my throat and chest. It felt like a ball of fire in my throat. I was stressed at a 10, angry at a 7, and sad at a 6 that this person said these words to me. So if reading could get you to a place where you can articulate your moment, even if, Lynn, as you said, you are disassociating, if you're flying away from the moment, that's okay. As long as you can notice that and understand that's how you respond. Because the first goal of ours and all of our learning objective is self-awareness. And what parts of your story are coming into play. And we get into that as well. Because at reading, you may then even be able to say, well, this is bringing up images of my childhood for me, and I'm hearing self-talk around my value and worth at this moment. And even if you never say these words to the other person involved in the exchange, if you just know them from yourself, you're that much better prepared to then recast. And recast is where how I like to say is where you reframe and you recalibrate your stress. So if you just named your stress at a 10, your sadness at a 6, your anger at a 7, What's going to take you to a few notches down? And we think that's very important to understand the differentiating level, because we say maybe if a police officer is stressed at a 10, what decision are they able to make? Under what
not make.
pressure? But what if they were stressed? Maybe they were at an 8. Maybe at an 8, then they have access to their peripheral vision and hearing, access to their self-talk and training. So what takes you there? And we have another skill set. We use comeback lines and really a skill of rewriting or reframing your racial story to help people get from a 10 to an 8 to maybe a 6. With the ultimate goal of resolving. And what resolving is, what is a healthy conclusion that comes from marginalized and BIPOC people that is not taxing on your health and affirms your humanity? And we don't say keep your job or be or be like a social justice warrior, but what affirms your humanity. And this is Dr. Stevenson's like prescription and our framework for managing racial stress.
Yeah, I can see it's interesting because, you know, people don't even have, I think, basic communication skills aren't taught. People aren't taught about emotions. They don't have the language. And it seems that we have these points of connection overlap where there's a lack of language, literacy, vocabulary, understanding of these very important concepts that really can help us frame and deal with these difficult and challenging things.
Right. But then I think also too, like you're saying, you know, there's no wrong time to talk about race, but, you know, trying to get parents to talk about that with their children. But I also think about the parent as a child who never had a chance to come to terms to any of these things. And then, you know, now they are the adult, you know, there's a lot to unpack for them to get to a place where they can even be in you know, a place to heal, to even engage with their own child or the, you know, other people. There's definitely a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe that's why people aren't doing it so much, especially whites. They're just not really engaging in this as much. Are you finding that with the people in your community?
You know, well, that's a great question. Most folks come to us two ways, right? One way, we have regular institutes. They used to be annual, and with the years, I'd say we're having in the last couple of years, we've increased the number of institutes, and that's when individuals choose to come to us, like going to a conference, right? Pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, it would be, you know, we'd host it in Philadelphia and 80 people would come and we'd be together for 4 days. And now we do it in a virtual space, much like this. But those are usually individuals, sometimes cohorts of people will come, maybe from a school district or an organization. And they come and walk through that process. And a large percentage of them, yeah, I mean, a decent percentage of them are white people, people of color. So like that depends. And just in terms of who signs up. What we do find with our other product is it's a client-based course training, and essentially an organization comes to us, has heard about us. Say tomorrow someone is listening to this, watching this, they'll reach out, hey, tell me, you know, what my organization's interested in. And what we do then is we come to an organization. Of course, now it's happening via Zoom, and then we help them with a particular problem. And one of the problems a couple of problems we usually see or challenges would be a new leadership. Something's happened internally or in the culture, organizational culture. Black employees or certain employees are coming together and asking, you know, kind of knocking on the door for leadership, like we need some help. And everything that Shamm just described is really skill building. So like we fundamentally believe that it's competence over character, right? So it's not whether or not you're a good or a bad person. And I think, Lynn, what you're getting at, oftentimes white people, maybe others, but definitely white folks in this country they're in that dynamic, like I don't want to be the bad person. I don't want someone to call me racist. When in reality, in Dr. Stevenson's research and his original question about should we talk to children about race, right? The answer is yes, and here are some ways to do it. So the tools that we use in our work, storytelling, journaling, Shamm mentioned role plays, we do debates, comeback lines. So like what's sort of this suite of things that you have that you can use in these racially stressful moments once you learn how to read, recast, and resolve. And we create spaces for that to happen. And the one way I want to say this, and I think this is where we're different than many other organizations, is we don't ask people to do anything we wouldn't do. So every time we give someone a prompt about your earliest racial memory or a professional setting, or what would your do-over be at that time you were at a 10, like Shamm said, and I felt it in my chest, like what would your do-over be? There's two things that happen. One, we share a story out loud, someone on our team. We have a small but mighty team, and we have about 30 plus, 35 plus trainers who do the work with us as independent contractors. And we all have to share a story to become a trainer. I mean, this week alone, I think both of us, at least I know I am, I'm sharing a professional race story a couple of times with some clients. And that creates a space where folks go like, oh, you're just talking about your childhood. I have a childhood. If I'm sitting in front, I have one too. So now I can engage and I can step into the arena, so to speak. And then we walk folks through those steps. So for us, we name it, but we also demonstrate that this is something that you can get better at, right? This is something that practice is really important. If not, to Shamm's example about a police officer, or think about a teacher, think about the disparities in healthcare. Like if more folks are able to recognize where they're stressed around face to face in the moment, racial encounters, how much better might you be at your job? And more importantly, how much better would you feel physically, internally, mentally?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I feel like it just reminds me of just how important vulnerability is in this work. I mean, it reminds me also of this quote from June Jordan. She said, to tell the truth is to become beautiful. So it's like you become radiant, you become beautiful if you can actually just see the truth and accept it for what it is. That actually is just so powerful.
Agreed. Somewhat in line with that, in Dr. Stevenson's book, he talks about pensive reflection and then disruptive action. Right? So if you think about the steps that we're taking people through, that's what we're asking them to do. Like take a minute and tell your truth, right? That's the beauty. And then now that once you do that, I feel like they're in a very good way, in a healthy way, there's really no turning back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Well, hopefully we can get some more people to sign up and do some workshops with you. Sounds like a really good option.
Yeah, so the racial stress, can you talk about, I mean, I think we were talking about the stress and the trauma around race, and why racial literacy and how racial literacy can help with that. I think it's just the experience of being part of a racialized society where you're experiencing injustices or racial abuse.
Yeah, and to find healing around that. I mean, part of this quote, just this racial ignorance becomes a monster that terrorizes us in our daily life, people of color. It's just, I mean, I feel it every day. It's like this kind of like fog, this cloud that you feel every day. And how can you move through that by examining it and turning it into some kind of healing, transform that monster into some kind of
and that's what's really standing out with me in this quote, the last line. But can healing take place without such an examination? And I argue our work is a case for no. We do deep excavation to help you build these skills along the way. So we take you from your first racial experiences to your most stressful one, when you were encountering either in a professional setting or a figure of authority, a person in your community. We talk about the moments where you were at a 10, because you have to know yourself. To truly know a 9 or an 8, you must know the 10. And we think and something I've learned from this work at large is that the solutions are in our stories, in as much as a lot of the problems. Because there are patterns that emerge in our stories. When people in our trainings tell us their first racialized experience, I can almost guess at this point. And it's cringeworthy and how repetitive a lot of these behaviors are, but it's in a school for people of color. It starts really young, kindergarten, first grade, for their ages 5, 6, 7. And it's painful to witness it. But in these stories, we also examine them in a way so you are thoughtfully processing your experiences. We're not trying to re-traumatize folks or reignite them into pain that they don't need to relive. So we ask you about behaviors. How are your caregivers in this moment? If we could look at your ecosystem in this story, who's taking care of you? Who's offering you protection? Who's offering you affection? And I feel like in as much as our stories hold pain, they also hold our solutions.
Yeah, exactly. The more we dig into it, the more we see that we can solve the problems. You know, it's all laid out. The roadmap is laid out in front of us. It's just a matter of really digging in and doing that work. So true. And it's so individual.
It's so individual.
And yeah, I would just add like to that point, the story's always like my stories, there are always other actors in the story. And I think once you share that story and you kind of mine for it and process it, then you realize it's not necessarily your fault. Like we have folks who do work with us and in trainings, you know, and they don't realize maybe you love your grandmother and that shouldn't have happened. You know, when she called, you know, a boy in a store a certain name, you know, like you could actually balance those two and recognize their humanity, and then it creates a willingness to have a dialogue. And so as folks walk through the arc of our training, you know, the last couple of things we do are more collaborative, like a debate, or you know, tapping someone to role play for you, or co-creating comeback lines, right? So then our hope, and I think it holds true, is that folks, even if they're not from the same organization, they leave and realize they have someone else now who is interested in healing, who is willing to share their story, who I could call up. Like I might be able to call you and say like, hey, Lynn, I was at a 9 when my supervisor came in and asked me this question. You got a minute? You know, and we could actually talk. And you would know exactly what, like we actually start our meetings with that. Like as a
so
team.
it's like building community. It's building community.
So it's building community at the same time you're taking care of yourself. And I think what's in this quote, metaphors or analogies aside, is like that monster that's terrorizing you oftentimes for Black folks are the disproportionalities that exist in healthcare, right? Like there are things that people of color succumb to. And as Shamm says, Shamm, if you want to say it, I'll let you say it. You want to do it, like not let you, but Shamm says in these dual pandemics that we're living in, right? You know, white supremacy and COVID. Just look at the numbers and that, you know, so this monster is not just on this, it's not just in this paragraph, in this quote, it's real. And people are getting hurt and dying, and we know that. And it's not necessarily from physical violence all the time. It's what we have to carry because we don't have an opportunity to share how racial stress affects us. And to your point about children, I'll just say this: I almost think they're the best at it. They really are. We're doing some work in schools. We've always been in schools. Dr. Stevenson's been years in schools, predominantly white, independent institutions, but also public schools, both district and charter, and higher ed. You know, and they're ready to talk about it. You know, and then they, you know, if they get that teacher that's not aware of racial literacy, you know, good luck to the teacher, because they're going to name things, and it gives them another skill and another angle with which to take care of themselves.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, with the young kids, it's like they have an ability to accept, you know, and be aware, and at the same time forgive. You know, like they can see that and they can forgive, but adults have a very hard time with both. You know, awareness, seeing the truth, and forgiving that. You know, so that there can be some positive action that comes out of that. There's this inability to do that, so that's the struggle.
Yeah, and I think in terms, okay,
racial awareness, we're right on time.
Yeah, I think you probably said some of that earlier about. I mean, I think the hard that it's hard and that people haven't been taught. And that they're, they get defensive, but can you speak more about the barriers and maybe how we can overcome them?
Oh.
That's a big one.
It's a big one. I'm trying to lean on our approach and what the research would say barriers to awareness would be.
And I can just ask also, Shamm, thinking about a person who, I think most of the people that are coming to you are willingly, they're actually engaging their will. They want to come to you, they want to do the work. But for those who don't see the need for this and who the barriers are really just kind of this fortress around themselves that they have created, how do you break down that barrier? How do you break down that person's barrier?
Yeah, like we see trends in our work too, where we have large clients, we that span over hundreds, and you're not going to find that everyone's gung-ho for this work. It takes it, and especially the way we approach it, because it was very personalized work, because we think it's your personal and professional. Your personal bleeds into your professional obligations, especially if you occupy a marginalized identity. But I would say there's like a certain portion of folks that are just not willing to engage. And then I put on my clinician / line story hat to help me try to understand these folks. If we really do lean on the belief that it is competency and not character, then I lean on the assumption that they do not have the skill set. They do not have the skill set to listen or even have the tolerance, which ability, like they don't have like the scope for tolerance, or they're really stressed. Because there are times when they encounter these moments and they genuinely feel they are at a 10, even if this moment may be a 2.
I'm just thinking about those rioters in the Capitol. Like, just imagining a person like that, the barrier.
That's out of 10, beyond. And how do you engage someone that's being actively traumatized? Your approach is different there. Is that of survival and stability than it is necessarily awareness.
I mean, I would just add, Linda, we actually, depending on how or why we're engaging with some people, there are folks who come to us because they're coming as part of an organization. So a leader or the board or someone's decided that this is important work. So that participant may not have necessarily decided to be there, and someone's telling them that it's either a function of your job, this is what we're doing holistically through our organization or our team. I mean, we'll get people who are like, I don't have a story, but I think the beauty of the model and the way we deliver it is that they'll be in a space with another, 8 to 11 people. We work in small groups and, we pay attention to ratios. If they're going around the room and people who look like them are sharing stories and everyone has a story, they realize, and we nudge, repeatedly from a number of angles. Because the first time is just journal, just write it on your own, right?
That's like success for us, Charles, because I think, and I don't know, forewarn clients this, but our metrics of success are a bit different than other organizations. When people leave our trainings, I don't expect them to say they're happy off the charts. What I do hope for them is that they notice whatever they are feeling.
Yep.
Even if they're noticing that they don't want to be there. Because to that person that says they don't have a racial story, well, they just witnessed 10 other racial stories in that space. They have just engaged in racial stress in ways they've never engaged before. So they are practicing the skill of reading at minimum. And that's who we work with. We work with people that are noticing or willing to notice, because those are our building blocks.
Right. Yeah, so go ahead.
I think from there, we just hope to humanize. Like once you start noticing in yourself and in other people's stories, our ultimate goal through the storytelling is to help you humanize one another. Because you'll see this in all of our training. Somebody would tell a story and it'll be one point that takes you away and makes you think of another story, or it'll be a domino effect of people just like just a cascading orchestra of their own experiences based off the experiences they heard in this one narrative. And to us, that's a victory. You've noticed where you've never noticed before. You've spoken where you've never spoken before. You've engaged. Even though that engagement can seem negative, if we're really combating this world that has no fluency, no literacy, just the ability to listen, I think, is a success for us.
Yeah, all I was going to add sorry, real quick. Well, go ahead, Kirsten. I apologize.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that we often, I think, Shamm, that's a salient point in terms of the power of someone else sharing a story and people realizing that there's elements of that stress or that story arc in their own story. So a good example that shows up, I would say almost every time someone tells a story about a grandparent, right? Who they love, but the same grandparent would talk about Black people a certain way when they were out of earshot, or the same grandparent would talk about someone of a different identity or a different, right? Like, and then that, once we get to that point, then that's the work, right? Because then now it's like, I love this person, yet, but if you think of maybe this happened 50 years ago, maybe this happened yesterday, maybe it happened, then it creates a conversation that so many people can engage in, as opposed to us. We're not didactic. We don't stand in front of people and lecture. We talk about white supremacy. We talk about systemic racism. We talk about history, but what we're really focused on is getting people to have a conversation essentially with themselves. And we model that in the training. So there's a path for them to see that it's doable. And we're not, and every time one of our trainers shares a story, we know the purpose of that story depending on the client, right? But where it's going to go, we don't necessarily know.
Never know.
Because every time you tell a story, you tell it a little bit different. It's
Right.
like when you listen to a favorite song, there's going to be, you might like the horns, you might like the bass line. I can't wait for that chorus. But if it's as layered as human stories are, which many, a lot of art is, then next thing you know, they're like, wow, grandma was wrong. I love her. I wish I could have told her that. But now with my kids, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. And the learning is actually there. And we have people, specifically if they're coming from organizations, especially if they're educators, like, think about, what's your plan? Like, how are you going to use what you learn from that process in your day-to-day responsibility, be it as a parent or as a team leader, or owner, or an employee?
So I was going to ask, one scenario that I've seen a lot, often in workplaces, is you may have, it's a mixed group with white and BIPOC people, and the white people don't say anything. And then if you ask, like, if you're friendly with a white person that you feel like you could ask later, like, why aren't you guys saying anything? And some of them, they'll say, well, we don't want to take up the space. Like, we feel like we shouldn't be talking. Or I think they also think they don't have a racial story. Then you also sometimes have BIPOC people who feel like, why is it always us? Why are we the ones who always have to, be vulnerable and put ourselves out there and go through this trauma, when afterwards nothing will change, So I'm just wondering, one, if your groups tend to be mixed, and what you do to get people. I mean, it sounds like you all going first, maybe it opens the space for that, but what your thoughts are on that scenario.
I mean, that dynamic you just presented comes up frequently in the work. It's expected, actually, the divide. Oftentimes we do have BIPOC folks that unfortunately have a plethora of experiences that they can share, whereas our white counterparts lean on silence as an active form of engagement. But in our work, what we really try to do, we do have mostly mixed groups, but we try to orchestrate our stories in a way that would speak to the audience. So for an audience or a client that's mostly white, we highlight white narratives that center race in their stories. One of our trainers has has orchestrated a beautiful piece around his upbringing in Chicago, descendants of Italian Americans, and how culture was ingrained in his story, but also the tenets of racism, from his neighborhood to his grandparents' profession. But that, in a way, gives other people permission If I were to put my story in front of this crowd, it'll probably be very different response. I got a black and black racial story.
Yeah.
They need one they can connect with.
Yeah, one that they can connect with and just build off of that.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And we
do you feel that people are taking what they're learning in your workshops and turning it into everyday action for racial literacy, for, social justice, for anti-racism? Are they actually taking this in?
I really do believe so. And like the great thing about the skills we teach is like they're so like palatable. You can engage them in everyday life. We're teaching you also mindfulness, cognitive behavioral skills that people can use just when they're stressed. We're race first, and we center all notions about race in our work. But people come back reporting to us that they use the skills in traffic, or when they're talking to children, or when they're talking to their coworkers. But it's meant to be used, and it's meant to be practiced. And we say this often: practice, practice, practice.
Right.
And people report back to us how it's benefit them.
Yeah, I was gonna that's at the individual level. At the organizational level, folks come back. Most of our new clients are heard about us from someone who experienced our work. And folks, what we find is people will expand the number of stakeholders. So they may start with administration, and then they'll go, you know what, actually, we should probably have the board do that. And then that happens. And they say, you know what about our teachers? Oh, is there a parent group that, so that to me, just as us as partners being responsible for this organization, like that's a key indicator that the work is spreading. I think most DEI organizations right now are flooded with requests, even if you're really good, if you're really small, if you're really large, just because so many folks feeling like sort of knee-jerk response to having a Black Lives Matter statement and doing something. But we find that people really appreciate our work. And the other thing that we find is folks who go through and really get into read, recast, resolve, and storytelling, oftentimes they come back and reach out to one of us or someone else on the team and say like, hey, what does it take to become a trainer? Like, how can I go deeper into the work because it's changed the way I approach? And not the last thing, but I'd say like you don't learn how to drive a car by someone telling you how to do it. Like I can know where the brake pedal is and where the turn signal is, but it's not going to mean a thing until I'm out there on the road and I'm trying it out. So it takes time. And we try to let people know, like, you haven't solved everything. And I think it's I've had this feeling over the last year, like everybody has a book list now. Everybody's reading, like, where's the book list? Like, tell me what to read, right? Like, what are you going to do with that when you read it? And I'm not saying like as a challenge, but like, that's very different than saying, we don't have people just like listen to people's stories and that's it. Like there's work to do, even if Shamm showed a video of the story to everybody who's on the line right now. Like then we're going to stop and say, okay, now journal like how you feel about that. And then they're going to do that. And they're going to say like, well, someone tell us what, parts of what you journal, where did you feel that stress on a, like there's a number of steps that engage people in a different way. So I fundamentally believe that the takeaway is much different than, than reading a book, which is a beautiful thing. Like many of us are addicted to that process, as well as listen to someone talk, but like, what are you going to do about it? And we're building out some additional products that for folks who've already gone through our training or attended our institute, and they understand racial literacy, even if at a base level, they get to come back and try some other things on. That's going to happen in the next couple of months, where our trainers are leading courses that you could sign up for that could be about a racially literate yoga practice. It could be what's it like to be a Black father right now, right? There's a number of things that our community, we call it our village, that our village is creating, that are leaning on the practices, because we believe it's more than just an idea, or it is a theory, right? But it's backed by research and years of participants giving us feedback about what it takes and how it shows up in their world on a daily basis.
Like you said, it's a practice. There's only so much learning that you can do through a book.
Theory, got to put it in practice.
Right.
Yeah. Well, with that,
can we do a practice? Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Do we have a
minute?
Yeah.
Lynn, can I do the practice with you?
Oh, sure. Okay.
She sat back. Yeah, you want to sit forward.
Is it that kind of practice? I don't know, Shamm.
No, you're good.
everyone
I'm
will
good. I'm good. I'm good.
be able to also participate along. But really what I'm going to invite you to do is to recall a stressful encounter you had professionally based off race.
Okay.
Something that got you stressed above a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10, above a 7, you can feel it as soon as you talk about it.
Okay.
You imagining this moment?
Yes.
Is there something you feel comfortable sharing about this moment? Maybe some of the characters or the dynamics?
Sure. So it was with a teacher when I was first doing my my teacher training as a Waldorf teacher in one of the Waldorf schools. I was an assistant. She was a lead teacher. She was white. And almost on a daily basis, she would come to me with different complaints. Either, I didn't prepare the snack properly. I didn't use the right knife to cut. I didn't use this serrated knife. I needed to use a different knife. It was very, very specific. And one day I was talking to one of the parents because she was busy doing something, and one of the parents asked me a question about their child. And so I just, gave my observations of their child. And the teacher came after she realized I had been talking to a parent. She came over to me and she told me that that was not my place, that I was here to do the work, not to talk. And it was certainly because of my race.
Mm,
And it was definitely traumatic.
yeah. How long ago was this?
Oh, that was probably 10 years ago.
Does it come up in your memory often? Do you think about it, or is this something you keep talking
I do think about it now because now I'm a lead teacher in a Waldorf school, which is predominantly white. And I have an assistant, and I always think about the way that I was treated as an assistant, that I would never treat my assistant like that.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to ask you, can you name all the feelings that are coming up for you as you reflect on this moment? Just a few emotions.
Definitely like heat.
Mm-hmm. Are you feeling
Anger.
anger? Okay.
Helplessness at the time.
Okay.
Felt kind of trapped.
Okay. And maybe if you can help me understand your anger and helplessness, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate them?
My anger was definitely a 10.
Okay.
And then for the helplessness, I would say it was probably about a 7.
Okay.
It was I was in between both, feeling like so angry, but feeling like I couldn't do anything. So like that kind of like in between stuck place.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And did you feel it in your body anywhere?
In my heart.
In your heart?
Definitely like a racing pulse.
Okay. And in your heart,
like a sweatiness.
okay, good. I was gonna ask because you said heat earlier. Do you still feel the heat?
No.
No heat. Okay. Do you feel in your hands? You did a motion with your hands.
My hands are a little bit clammy-ish going now. Before they didn't feel like that. They're like a little wet.
Okay. And as you think of this, you painted a very vivid image. I already have the whole scene set up in my head, but maybe different images are coming to you. Do you have images of anything else that are surfacing?
Well, there were children around when she was yelling at me, telling me that I wasn't supposed to be talking.
And what about self-talk? Are there messages that you hear? This could be hard to decipher sometimes, but something repetitive that you're hearing in your brain. It might be something you repeat to yourself or something that was told to you.
You're not good enough.
Mm. And I want to ask you, Lynn, if you could go back in time, right? Rewrite this story and respond in a way that honors your anger at a 10 and hopelessness at a 7. What would you say to this lead teacher? All repercussions aside, just what do you wish you have said?
I would have said to her, you have no right to talk to me the way that you're talking to me. I have every right to talk to the children or the parents in this class. I am, I am good enough. I am an educator. I am, someone that needs to be heard.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm not going to be treated like this.
Good. I like that. Got stronger and stronger. How good did that response feel from 1 to 10 though?
Like an 8.
Like an 8. Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
How can we get it to a 10? What is a 10?
If I said, forcefully, don't you ever talk to me like that again. Right? If I was able to like embolden myself to, say something in that way, normally I'm much more reserved. So I think if I were to really come out and say it loudly, that would have made it more of a 10.
Can I have a sneak peek?
Don't you ever talk to me like that again. I don't know who you think you are. I am an excellent teacher and I'm going to be heard and I'm going to talk to these families and, you should be appreciating all the work that I do. And we're going to have to work on building a relationship that's more equitable.
Hey, yes, love it.
Thank you.
Yes. So this was a very quick and dirty way. Usually we're a lot more prescriptive with time and dosage of our work, but I just wanted to set an example of what we just took Lynn through. So it's called CLCBE. Maybe Charles, you can help. Can we write in the chat? I'm not sure if we can. Kristen's saying yes, I believe.
You should be able to.
Yeah. And I have to say that just doing that, I feel like there's been a knot that was unknotted.
Yes.
Just in that moment in me. And I felt like I had, made a peace with that experience and that memory, but clearly there's definitely still some trauma that's attached to it. So there's a lot of things that I think, we can go back and
Rewrite.
and kind of, rewrite or, just reimagine.
Yeah, and like that's how I see trauma, is like this messy fuzz ball of what do you call it, string. And when telling stories in narrative therapies helps us draw out those lines and build an arc to our stories and help us make sense of time and characters and just like nuances and context. I think it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, definitely.
For many types of trauma and stress, especially racial stress and trauma. But for
Thank you, that was awesome. I would do it again. You go through all of my traumas.
Do it at home.
Awesome, yeah.
It stands for calculate. So calculating your emotions, locating them on your body, communicating self-talk and self-imagery. And the last thing I didn't ask you to do is to actually breathe with emphasis on the exhale. CLCB.
Yeah, that's a good one too, because I definitely feel like I was holding my breath during part of it. So
yeah.
That's really important to like stay, grounded. That's where like kind of that like fleeing out of your body comes into it. So that's great. Yeah. Thank you for that. I wonder if there's anyone in the audience that has a question about anything we talked about, or even just that experience that we just had. We have like 2 minutes. If anyone wants to pop a question into the chat box, we'd love to get our distinguished panelists to answer it for you. Kirsten, do you see any questions?
No, but Charles mentioned that they have an image with that practice. So if we can get that, we can try to email it to people if that works. Or if it's on, I don't know if it's on your website, if there's any place you want. Lynn's sharing her screen. She could probably try to pull it up for you.
Is this time to plug in?
Yes, yes, please.
So as Charles mentioned earlier, we hold annual semi-regular trainings where folks come to us. Most of our work is client-based, so larger clients will approach us and we'll serve their greater audience. But we have institutes, which are like conference style, so people can come to us as individuals. And we're just happy to announce that we're having our first BIPOC Institute in February. That's fully funded. But if folks would like to sponsor seats or additional seats, that is an option made available to them. And we have our website. Our website's under construction at the moment, but we have a placeholder where people can be directed to general language about us and our donor page.
Okay, awesome.
Great. We can send that out when we're going to send the link afterwards when we have the recording ready, and we'll include your website so people can check that. That's wonderful.
Shamm, can you also add when we're sending out information to the people who are in the Zoom call, the questions that you asked me in case they wanted to try to do it again?
We have an image that goes with it. That can
Oh,
help
awesome.
guide
That would be
you.
great.
We can use.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much for being with us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really appreciated it. So now we're just going to switch gears a little bit and talk about what's coming soon. We have a couple of really important conversations around the table. This week, Professor Liliana Mason is going to be here talking about identity politics, race and race, anti-racism, which we're really excited about. And then we love Julie Lithcott-Haim. She's going to be joining us again this Sunday for our affinity space, celebrating Black beauty. And Kirsten, do you want to talk about the other two for this month?
Sure. So we've got, let's see, Alexa Martin, who is the author of the Playbook series, which is her most recent book, Snapped, is all about a character who's taking a knee. So she reckons with a lot of racial issues. The main character is biracial. She's Black and grew up sort of with her white family, and she's wrestling with racial issues. So we like the story and the idea of, seeing other people in reading fiction about people who are different from you, and just the story that she goes on. And then we've got Michael Steele on the 29th, and we're going to talk about just kind of the moment that we're in right now. So you can visit us on our website. We have events scheduled every month. Check out our challenge. And thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our guests. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the work that you're doing.
Yes, thank you.
Take care, folks.
You too. Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay. Let me stop sharing my screen.